Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. Today, we continue our exploration of the history of the Great Qin Empire, focusing on topics that some deliberately avoid, while others exaggerate. Here, I'll try to restore the facts as accurately as possible, but alongside that, I'll also share my personal insights, and I encourage you to think critically and make your own judgments. In the last two videos, we talked about the founding father of the Qin state, Duke Wen of Qin. This time, I want to take you into the world of Duke Wen as I see it. There are three cities in his life that are crucial. The first is Xichui Palace, located west of Qishan, roughly near Zhou, where the large ancient Qin tombs were discovered today. Both Duke Wen and Duke Xianyang of Qin are buried there. Why is Xichui Palace so important? Because it witnessed not only the most difficult times for the Qin state, but also how the Qin people managed to overcome adversity. More importantly, it was here that Duke Wen made a decision that would change the fate of the Qin state. He chose to become a Zhou person. And from here, 700 brave Qin warriors set out eastward, embarking on their return home journey. From that moment on, the Qin people fought tirelessly across generations, eventually uniting the world. Many people, when interpreting Qin history, often emphasize that the Qin state relied on force and power. But is that really the case? Was Duke Wen's power really enough to conquer the world? Could his 700 soldiers defeat the mighty Quanrong and Shirong tribes? Clearly, this seems impossible. Yet, in the end, these two seemingly powerful enemies were conquered by Qin. So, what did the Qin state rely on? It was the ability to adapt to the trend of the times and win the support of the majority, and all of this began with Duke Wen's declaration, "I am a Zhou person." The success of the Qin state was never due to the hard-handed tactics of a single ruler. It was because, like Duke Wen, they understood how to firmly stand their ground and win recognition. Who you are determines who will support you. Once you understand that, you've found your place. The Qin people's eastern expedition didn't actually go very far. Starting from Zhou, they advanced less than 100 kilometers eastward, reaching the confluence of the Qian and Wei rivers, which would later become an important base for the Qin state. Here, the famous Qianwei Alliance took place, and it was after this that Duke Wen established his capital, Xianyang. So, what happened during that time? The situation was very complicated. The Quanrong had weakened after 20 years of internal conflict, and another Shirong faction took the opportunity to attack them from the west. Meanwhile, the Zhou royal family in the east was also going through turmoil. The era of dual kingships ended, and King Ping of Zhou had a falling out with the state of Zheng, desiring to return to his homeland and reclaim Guangzhong. Therefore, the Zhou dynasty began to pressure the Quanrong from the east. The Quanrong found themselves trapped between two enemies, attacked by the Shirong from the west, and blocked by the Zhou royal family in the east, facing a dire situation. At this crucial moment, Duke Wen shouted the inspiring slogan, "Where we are, the border of Zhou is." Imagine how many displaced Zhou people in Guangzhong must have felt a spark of hope when they heard this. They had lost their homeland and were wandering, but Duke Wen's promise undoubtedly gave them a sense of belonging. Duke Wen took decisive action, occupying the San Pass and pushing eastward, finally opening the gateway to Guangzhong. This was his life. He didn't rely solely on military force like the Quanrong. The Quanrong had used war to destroy nearly all the Zhou lords in Guangzhong, but in the end, they failed to win the hearts of the people. And when the gates to Guangzhong opened, Duke Wen, as a Zhou person, led the exiles back. Those who had once been Zhou people became Qin people. They recognized the leadership of Duke Wen and no longer called themselves Zhou people, but proudly said, "We are Qin people." From retreating to Xichui Palace, inheriting the will of the Western Earl, to advancing to Xianyang, shouting, "Where we are, the border is," and finally recovering San Pass. Was this merely a military victory? If you only focus on the outcomes of the wars, you might fall into the trap of the hegemony model, thinking that power and force alone can rule the world. But is that really the case? Looking back at the journey, if it weren't for Duke Wen's initial determination to be a Zhou person, how could the Qin people have stood their ground? Without the Qianwei alliance, how could he unite those willing to follow him? Without the Zhou Yuan sacrifices to heaven and earth, how could he earn the trust of the people? None of this came from hard-handed tactics. Could 700 people really aspire to dominate the world? That seems unlikely. Moreover, Duke Wen's achievements went far beyond military victories. He established many of the systems that were essential for Qin to dominate, with one of the most crucial being the official historian system, the Qin state's official record-keeping system. Some might wonder, what does recording history have to do with building a hegemonic empire? Well, it's very significant. You only need to look at what Emperor Qin Shi Huang did after unifying the world. He burned books and buried scholars, focusing especially on destroying the historical records of the 6 former states and prohibiting them from circulating among the people. Why? Because controlling history means controlling the narrative. It means deciding a country's memory and identity. As the ancient saying goes, to destroy a nation, first destroy its history. In other words, if you want to completely wipe out a country, you first have to erase its history. Duke Wen understood this deeply. Of course, there's an unavoidable, awkward reality. Duke Wen was not a saint. If history were only written in a literary manner, it might selectively ignore the complex contradictions of reality, creating a perfect saintly figure. But true history is far more complicated. In the rise of the Qin state, politics, military culture, and even the construction of ideology were far more important than pure military force. Duke Wen was indeed a great ruler, but during his reign, he also made some highly controversial decisions. Among the most influential of these was the establishment of the earliest legal system in Qin. What is the essence of law? It has never been about restraining the lawmakers themselves, but about managing others. In the traditional Zhou right system, there was a saying, laws don't apply to the nobility and punishments don't apply to scholars, meaning the scholar official class didn't create laws for themselves, but used them to restrain common people. So why did Qin not need a legal system in its early days? Began to legislate under Duke Wen. This was closely tied to Qin's unique background. The Qin state was established on the ruins of the Western Zhou, and it gathered many exiled nobles from the Zhou as well as various tribal peoples. A simple tribe might maintain order through morality and tradition, but as the population grew more diverse, the need for law became apparent. However, the impression that the Qin laws left on later generations was one of extreme severity, often equated with tyranny. Among these, the most shocking was the punishment of exterminating 3 generations. This type of punishment did not exist in the Zhou ritual system at the time, and even King Zhou of Xianyang, the ruler most criticized for his cruelty, never carried out the extermination of 3 generations. So why did Qin implement such an extreme punishment? The reason is actually tied to the state's policy of consolidation. Faced with people from various surnames and even different cultural backgrounds, Qin needed a strong measure to maintain the stability of its rule, and exterminating 3 generations was a strategy used to integrate internally and intimidate potential adversaries. So what exactly does exterminating 3 generations mean? It is generally understood that the 3 generations of Qin refer to wife and children, direct family members, including unmarried sons, the paternal family, father and his direct relatives, the maternal family, mother and her direct relatives. However, it's important to note that the concept of family in Qin was not fixed. It evolved with the changing social structure. For instance, whether a person's younger brother is considered part of the paternal family depends on whether he had already established an independent household. If he still lived with his father, he would remain part of the paternal family. Similarly, an adult son who had separated would no longer be included under wife and children. The strictness of Qin's laws was one of the key factors in the state's rise in times of chaos. But because of their harsh nature, Qin's legal system became the epitome of cruel laws in later generations, often criticized after the fall of the Qin dynasty. The concept of exterminating 3 generations was not static but adjusted over time. While many subsequent dynasties continued using the term exterminating 3 generations and claimed it originated from Qin law, each era had its own interpretation of what the 3 generations actually meant. Why did this change occur? It's closely linked to the social structure and political needs of each era. Ultimately, exterminating 3 generations was not just about punishing criminals, but a method of social integration. By completely eradicating a certain group, the rulers ensured that these individuals would not pose a threat to the existing order. In other words, exterminating 3 generations was about expelling those unwilling to assimilate from the societal framework entirely. During the Han Dynasty, with a shift in the social structure, the definition of 3 generations was also adjusted. One of the most prominent political issues in the Han Dynasty was the interference of the empress's family in government affairs. The maternal relatives of the emperor wielded significant power and influenced the court. Therefore, the Han Dynasty's definition of 3 generations was different from that of the Qin Dynasty. The Han Dynasty's 3 generations were the paternal family, father, mother, and their direct relatives, the maternal family, including the father-in-law and his family, wife and children, direct family members, including unmarried sons. As we can see, the Han Dynasty's scope for exterminating 3 generations was broader than that of the Qin Dynasty, especially with the inclusion of the maternal family, targeting the political reality of excessive power held by maternal relatives. By the time of the Song Dynasty, the situation changed again. On the surface, the Song Dynasty valued civil governance and adopted relatively mild policies. But when it came to matters of loyalty and treason, their methods were extremely decisive. In the Song Dynasty, the extermination of 3 generations became even more thorough and could be described as brutally complete. The Song Dynasty's 3 generations were the paternal and maternal family, parents, grandparents, and the father-in-law, the descendants, sons and their direct relatives, the grandchildren, whether old or young, all were executed. In the Song Dynasty, the extermination of 3 generations spanned from the parents to the grandchildren, creating a model where, once a crime was committed, not only the direct relatives, but also the descendants, were wiped out. This truly achieved complete eradication. In conclusion, although the concept of exterminating 3 generations existed for a long time in Chinese history, its application changed over time, always serving the governance and political needs of the era. It was both a terrifying punishment and a tool for maintaining power, reflecting the extreme pursuit of political stability by successive dynasties. Why exterminate 3 generations? In essence, it was not merely a punishment but a method of social integration. Exterminating 3 generations was about removing a group that refused to assimilate from the societal framework. For the Qin, this extreme measure was necessary due to severe internal conflicts and the need for strong unification. Often, we view ancient systems as too cruel, even incomprehensible. But in reality, most systems were not designed out of a desire for cruelty, but rather as a helpless response to real-world problems. Many historical systems were created to address specific issues, not to establish harsh laws arbitrarily. In other words, if there had been a gentler way to solve the problem, the rulers would not have resorted to the harshest methods. But in certain historical periods, perhaps there was truly no other choice. The reason we often find it hard to understand the decisions of ancient rulers is because we have never truly been in their environment. What is history? We often think we know everything, but the truth is not so. How much do you really know about Duke Wen of Qin? Perhaps you are familiar with his achievements and his place in history. But let me ask you, what was his real name? Duke Wen of Qin is merely a posthumous title awarded to him after his death. So, what was he called during his lifetime? How did he introduce himself? Did he have a formal name? Ironically, we still don't have the answer. We can almost be certain that there was once a record of Duke Wen's real name in history, but now it is completely lost. Perhaps due to the loss of historical materials, or perhaps because later historians deemed the information unimportant. Either way, we will never know. This is the incompleteness of history. What we see is only a tiny piece of information that has leaked through the gaps of history, or part of the narrative that was intentionally shown to us by later generations. In fact, today we cannot even determine, was Duke Wen of Qin one person or a title for multiple people? Did he accomplish all his deeds on his own? Or were they the work of 2 or even 3 generations? But these questions were not important to later rulers. They only cared about how Duke Wen used military power to establish his hegemony, and how he influenced the course of history. As for us, we often only care about his success, and ignore the details forgotten by history. But if you truly love history, you should not only focus on the glorious deeds of the victors, but also explore those parts that have been overlooked, forgotten, or even deliberately concealed.